Hello and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. I am your Produce Talks host, Ian Brody. This episode is all about plastic packaging. We'll be taking a look at what consumers are thinking about plastic packaging with insights from Abacus Data, and we'll also take a look at recycling and sustainability practices coming out of the water bottling industry. Let's get to it. Plastic packaging is a contentious subject around the world, with measures to reduce or eliminate single-use plastics being implemented by individual families, by governments, by NGOs, and by businesses of all shapes and sizes. As plastics pollute our oceans and find their way into landfills, a major global crisis is emerging. The damaging effects of a growing disposable culture around the world and plastics in our ecosystem has become more and more present in mainstream media and social media. CPMA has recognized the need for an integrated industry approach that best meets regulatory requirements while keeping produce safe and affordable for the end consumer. With that in mind, the CPMA Plastics Packaging Working Group was established to identify efforts already underway within the industry, determine best practices, and develop an industry-supported roadmap to maintaining food quality and safety while reducing the environmental impact of plastics. Part of the work coming out of the Plastics Packaging Working Group is a consumer insights survey conducted by Abacus Data. And we kick off today's episode with David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
All right. So I appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, this is a busy time for you right now in October. You had mentioned for pollsters, it's like a Super Bowl, but it's not just one day. It's spread out over quite a few.
41-day Super Bowl.
The 41-day Super Bowl.
We're getting close to the end now when we're recording this, but not quite. But we're getting there.
Yes, that's right. So today is, today's October 15th. The election is on Monday, and this episode is going to be released at the end of October. So with that being said, let's see if you could break out your crystal ball. Do you have a prediction that you could give us?
Yeah, this is like the worst type of prediction because like you're actually going to be able to hold me accountable after, and people are going to be listening, being like, he was so wrong. Look, even today, I think it's really too close to call, frankly. I think over the weekend, the last few weeks, we've seen some movement in the polls. The NDP's up. The Bloc is up in Quebec. But the Liberals and the Conservatives nationally are still, 1 or 2 points, depending on the poll, ahead or behind each other. I think it's most likely looking like we're going to have a minority government of some sort. But, just in the last few days, there's been talk of coalition and the Conservatives pushing back on the idea that the NDP and the Liberals might work together. And so I'm not even sure how over the next 6 days that all works itself out. But it has been a really interesting election. I'm doing no favors to our listeners by saying I really don't know how this will end, except that it's going to likely be close. And whatever parliament comes after it is going to be more fractured, and there'll be likely more voices influencing government policy than we've had over the last 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The election really sets the stage for a conversation on plastics, getting to the topic at hand today. As two key issues to voters are cost of living and climate change. So I think it really sort of sets the stage for that discussion on plastics in the produce industry.
It really does, right? Those two, throughout this election campaign, the parties have been really outbidding each other on who's going to make life more affordable for Canadians. And at the same time, there's been an incredible focus, probably more than ever before, on the environment and climate change as being issues. You had those, the student strike and the protests earlier in the campaign. And I think you're right that the issue of plastics in produce or plastics in the grocery store, really those two issues come together. And what we're talking about, the survey of Canadian consumers, it's clear that there's a lot of desire to see the amount of plastics reduced. There's recognition that single-use plastic in particular is not necessarily a great thing and that we should be reducing its use, broadly speaking, across all parts of our lives. But on the other hand, our research also shows that people are concerned with the cost of living. They recognize and report that the cost of food in particular is a pain point in their lives. And so any public policy choice, any direction that the industry goes in, I think has to recognize that those two issues are, from the consumer's mind, fundamental in how this issue gets solved. Fix this problem, reduce the amount of plastic, but do so in a way that doesn't increase the cost of food or affect the availability of certain products, or, as we'll talk about more, the longevity of certain products. So in other words, do it, but don't change anything that affects my quality of life, the availability of certain products, or the cost that I'm going to have to pay. Yeah, which is usually what consumers tell us.
So yeah, we'll get into the study. So this past summer, you conducted a market research study for CPMA as part of the work that's coming out of our plastics packaging working group. So what were the objectives for this study?
Well, I think there were two primary objectives, and it was one, to inform the work of the working group, to make sure that the voice of the consumer was included in the decision-making and the deliberations. And two was to really better understand how public attitudes, consumer attitudes have been shifting, right? Because we had seen quite dramatically how fast I think consumers' views on plastics has shifted, right? There was only almost a year ago where the whole plastic straw phenomenon happened, and how quickly, food service providers had to shift because the demand from consumers was so strong and the reaction was so swift. So we wanted to make sure that we were informing the conversations, and anything that comes out of the working group is grounded in good market research, and then two, making sure that we had a good grasp, actually, of where the consumer was and how that views were evolving.
Right. Yeah, it's about getting more informed so that we can make the best decisions and support policy, I guess, going forward.
The way that we approached this research was to recognize that this issue is both a consumer issue and a public policy issue, right? Mm-hmm. And so at any given time, a consumer is both a consumer and a citizen. And understanding how they bridge their views on climate change, the environment, sustainability more broadly, with their preferences as a consumer was a key part of the design of this study and what we were trying to understand.
So let's dig into it a little bit. What were some of the key highlights in the study when it came to consumers' views on plastics?
Well, I think the starting point is to recognize that a clear majority of the country, 63%, said they strongly believe that we need to reduce the amount of single-use plastics in our lives. And we defined what single-use plastic was for them. And so that's the starting point, is that most Canadians either believe that it's critically important that we do something about this, or they're concerned about it. And there's very few who say this isn't something that industry or government or society more generally has to come at. And it's pretty consistent across age groups, across the country. What we did see was some differences of opinion across by type of consumer. So consumers who typically cared more about the convenience of certain products or the longevity of produce products were a little less likely to be as concerned about single-use plastic overall, but it was pretty consistent across the board. The other thing that we learned were our perceptions today. And there is a general sense first that when, the average consumer walks into the produce department of their grocery store, they believe there is too much single-use plastic being used. Mm-hmm. And when we ask, do you think it's getting worse or is it getting better? Most people say, I don't notice it getting better or worse either way, that things are staying pretty static. And so that's the current perception, that we need to reduce overall, that there's probably too much being used right now, and that they aren't noticing a clear shift either way. Mm-hmm. The other key piece about public perceptions about this issue is when we ask them, do you think it'd be easy or difficult to reduce substantially the amount of single-use plastics in the produce department for fresh fruit and vegetables? How hard would it be for CPMA members to actually reduce this? And what we learn is that a lot of consumers don't have very clear views, right? Their instinct is to think, I think it would be fairly easy to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. But there's very few people who say it's impossible or it's super easy, which I think gives industry space to come up with some creative solutions, right? Because people aren't instinctively saying, I know this is a problem and it's easy to solve, so you go out and fix it. No, they're saying, I know this is a problem and it's not obvious to them how we really figure it out. I think there's a solution, but it won't necessarily be super easy to do. And I think that's important because it allows, I think, industry to be thoughtful, come up with solutions, and not be pushed too hard into making a decision that really affects the consumers negatively. And I think that's what we really learned out of this research. So that's the core perceptions, I think, that are the starting point to how consumers come at this issue.
Right.
And an organization, whether it's an entire sector or an individual brand or company, its reputation will increasingly be tied to whether or not the public believes they're sincerely interested or care about reducing their environmental footprint, right? So just talking about it, demonstrating the effort and work that certain organizations are doing is really important. I'm not talking about greenwashing, like you have to do something, but it's important to talk about what you're doing. And I think what we've learned even in our initial conversations with the working group is that maybe the produce sector doesn't talk enough about the things it's already doing, and that is a big step. One of the things we also learned was that people, on the one hand, want action. They want to see reductions in single-use plastic. But one of the other big questions we wanted to explore was, do people recognize there's potential consequences for a reduction?
And that goes back to perhaps that conflict that consumers have, like in terms of, okay, I want to reduce my plastics. I want to do what's right for the environment. But at the same time, we get into, okay, all these things that plastics can provide in terms of maintaining quality, maintaining freshness, maintaining food safety, preventing from damage. So going back to the study, I saw that you kind of used strawberry packaging as a test. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was interesting. So we showed two images. We did the survey online, so we could show respondents images, and we showed them strawberries in a clamshell, plastic clamshell, and strawberries in a cardboard basket. And we said, okay, consider these two options and now ask a few questions. And what we did is we wanted to see, do consumers, does the type of packaging signal to them something about the product itself and about the conditions by which that product got there, right? Costs, ease of shipping, will it last, on the shelf or in the fridge or on the counter, all those kinds of things. And what was interesting was most people recognized or thought that the cardboard basket was the better choice for the environment, right? 62% said it was clearly the more environmentally friendly option. Mm-hmm. But that was the only item in which that basket beat out the clamshell. On things like easier to transport, will keep the berries safe from contamination, easier to see the berries themselves, less likely to damage the fruit, and will keep the berries fresher for longer, the clamshell won out over the basket. What's interesting is, at least again, this is hypothetical, it's in a survey, so everyone needs to always bear that in mind, but when we asked which of these two packaging likely contains the higher quality fruit, neither package won out. It was basically a split, 3 ways between the clamshell versus the basket versus neither of them have a better one. So that was an interesting learning. But when we ended up asking them, okay, but which one, assume the price is the same and you can get this, the same amount of strawberries by each package, which would you want? Which package would you prefer? By about a 57% to 43%, they picked the basket, the cardboard. So even though only on one attribute did the basket win out, when in this hypothetical situation, people still went towards the basket, even though they thought that the clamshell might be better for certain attributes. So it's a really interesting, I think, exercise to show what signals these packaging types send to people, and perhaps how increasingly concern about the environment might overtake people's preferences in the grocery store if they've got choice between different products and different types of packaging.
Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the key points in that question was assuming the price is the same. And I think that's sort of that remaining factor that, maybe we'll see alternative packaging come into play that could be done at the same price. But obviously that's an important factor for not only the consumers, but of course, retailers, growers, shippers, everybody across the supply chain. So it'll be really interesting to see how this sort of evolves over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I guess the only other point I'll add about the price and affordability, because we talked about that earlier, about it being so important, is I think the public, a lot of consumers recognize that if we were to eliminate most single-use plastic packaging in produce, that it would have likely, in their minds, an impact on the price of that product, on the price of shipping. because, there would be more waste, or there would be more damage to products, or the longevity of those products wouldn't last as long. And so there is a recognition, right? This is this balancing. I think the public often are pretty reasonable with their views on this. The other thing that was important, not just on price, is the third dimension, which we haven't even brought up yet, is food waste itself. And how much food waste does a plastic packaging actually prevent? And understanding that in terms of coming up with a solution, I think will be important because the public is mindful of it. We have been primed, over the last few years to recognize the impact that food waste has on climate change itself. And so it's part of the mix that I think that the industry needs to and does bring up, but recognize that the public's there with them on asking those kind of questions.
So getting into another question, you asked, do produce companies care about the amount of plastics? And so that's another question that you asked to consumers to provide more insights on the views on how produce companies are doing when it comes to plastics. So what did you find there?
We actually found, this was one of the more negative results for the industry. It's like 70% of respondents said they didn't feel that the industry cared enough, right? That they don't really care all that much about finding ways to reduce the amount of plastic. And so this comes back to something, we mentioned earlier about how important it is for industry to be talking about this, to be being seen as being proactive, because right now I think public perception is that maybe producers and retailers aren't that engaged in this, right? And so I do think that there is room here for improvement, and I think I actually believe that the work that CPMA is doing is really important because it's putting the industry ahead of actually a lot of other sectors, and will help fight that public perception that producers aren't actually that concerned about this issue.
Definitely, and I think produce. When you walk into the grocery store, produce is the first thing that you see, and from the consumer perspective, that the consumer that's going to the grocery store, along their experience as a consumer, from buying the good to taking it home to cooking it, it's that first step in their experience as a consumer. So even though produce isn't even anywhere near the number one contributor of single-use plastics in the whole system of plastics, that's not what the consumer sees. I think in the consumer's eyes, because it's that first contact in the grocery store, it becomes a little bit more prominent for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's high profile. It's there. It's present. And you have to also keep in mind that while we might buy, a laundry detergent jug, which is all plastic, and put it in the shelf, and we might use it every week, we're not throwing it out every week. Whereas it might feel like we're throwing out more plastic related to produce because it's coming in and out of the house more often than some of the other products that we use. So I always say, as a market researcher, I live in the world of perception. Reality doesn't often matter. It's what I think and what I assume and feel every day. And I think that's a lot of what you were just describing, is that produce is front and center. It's there, it's present. And as a result, it's often overestimated its impact. And so it creates even more an impetus for industry to step up and be seen as being proactive on this.
Right. To sum up, I guess, what were the other big takeaways from the study? Where should companies go from here?
Well, I think there's a few things that stand out to me. One is I do think we are seeing an increased recognition by the consumer of not just their individual impact, but perhaps the responsibility that producers and retailers and everybody in the sort of business and consumer ecosystem have to play in this process. And as concern about climate change continues to grow, and I think it will over the next few years, even more than it is today, and it's probably never been higher, that's going to put more onus on all of us, individuals, but also industry and government, just to sort of find solutions to this. That being said, I think we also learned from this research that it's not an easy solution, right? That even the typical Canadian consumer sees the trade-offs and the pros and cons of moving towards a zero plastic environment, if that's even possible. And they recognize that there's going to be an impact potentially on cost. There's going to be an impact on longevity. There's going to be an impact on transportation, on food waste. And so finding that sweet spot is what this is all about. Finding a sweet spot that brings the amount of plastic down, but at the same time doesn't create a backlash from consumers who say, I don't want to pay more, or I still want to get strawberries in, all year long. That's going to be, the point at which I think industry and government have to work together. And what the final point I'll make is there's not a great desire for government using a heavy hand on this. At the end of the survey, we asked, what's the most preferred approach to how you think this issue should be dealt with? And at the end of the day, which is not surprising because we're Canadian, most Canadians say, let's find a collaborative way. Industry and government should work together to find solutions that make sure that we can get all the produce we want, that the cost is contained as much as possible, but that we do what we can to protect the environment. And there is little desire to see an outright ban, government forcing certain types of behavior, that they recognize that this is probably more nuanced than it might originally have been. So I think that's the most important thing, is that nuance and that balance is I think what consumers are actually looking for. And that is often the case in a lot of this kind of work that we do.
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for your insights, David. It's been great working with you and your team at Abacus on this important issue.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ian.
And now a quick word from our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms.
Hi everyone, it's Lucy from the Nature Fresh Farm team. We are always trying to think outside of the box when researching and designing new product. And one of the biggest challenges our industry is facing right now is creating greener and more sustainable packaging. We know that consumers are pushing back against plastic in the produce department, which is why we are on a mission to discover more sustainable packaging options that meet their needs. To find out more, please visit www.naturefresh.ca.
And next up on the show, we have Crystal Howe, Sustainability Manager at Ice River Springs. Welcome, Crystal.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start off and talk a little bit about Ice River? How did the company get started? And can you talk a little bit about Ice River Springs?
Ice River Springs is a family-owned and operated company. We've been around since 1995. We actually started as a fish farm and ended up moving towards bottled water. What we found with farming as a background, that we wanted to make sure everything we did was environmentally sound and that we were always making the right choice with sustainability in mind. So we started recycling and using, producing a bottle that's 100% recycled PET, which is new to the market, and it's something that just wasn't happening before we arrived. What we found that about 2016, we determined that we needed a sustainability manager, and so that's where my role began. But prior to that, we've always been very quiet, very humble about what we do. I think probably part of that is the farmer background. But we determined in 2016 that we had to start telling our story, because really we need to start developing sustainable businesses and encouraging others to do the same kind of thought process that we do every day here to help drive sustainable business development in Canada.
Right. Now, and I'm looking at the Ice River Springs bottle right now. I had one lying around the house. It's a green bottle. Obviously, certainly kind of highlights that sustainability side. And it says, bottle made from 100% recycled plastic, 100% PET recycled plastic. And that sounds like an exceptional accomplishment.
Yes, it definitely is. We produced the green bottle, our own brand in green, because that stream of plastic was a difficult one to find an end use for. So we thought, hey, we'll just use it for our own. The majority of our PET that comes through the Blue Box program is actually clear and blue, and that goes out to the rest of our customers. Mm-hmm. But what we found at the beginning was actually people told us we couldn't do this. Even while we were doing it, we were told, no, it's not possible. You can't do that. But the interesting thing, and something great that we have that a lot of companies don't have right now, is this co-founder, Jamie Gott. And I feel like he has really driven us to push our limits. So he wanted us to try lots of different things, try PLA, try Tetra Pak, move towards recycled content, the green bottle, as you speak about it, the caps that can be turned into chairs. He's always driven us to be vertically integrated, to be self-reliant, and always keep sustainability at top of mind. So I think that pushes us to be ahead of the curve and always driving for the next best thing that we can move towards.
Mm-hmm. Now, so you mentioned the Blue Box program. Do you take in a significant portion of the recycled plastics from the program?
Yes. We take the PET portion of what comes through the Blue Box. So we take about 85% of what's sold in Ontario.
Wow.
And we can, it's a significant amount. But what's nice is that it creates value for the Blue Box and helps to recover some of those costs for stewards as well. And
I saw on your website that you frame it as a closed loop business model. Can you explain that a little bit?
I think the neat thing about Ice River is that, especially here in Ontario, we deliver water down to the city on a regular basis. When we drive our trucks down to the city, we can drive 5 to 10 minutes from our delivery location and go pick up PET bales from the closest MRF, or a material recovery facility. Then we drive them back up to Shelburne here, BMP, and we drop them off. We get loaded up with some nice clean flake from the recycling facility, take that up to Feversham, which is about 25, 30 minutes from here, where they turn it into food-grade resin, and we make our bottles and fill them with water again. So the idea of the closed loop is we never have an empty truck. We're using what already exists here, and the closed loop is very, very strong in Ontario. That circular economy mindset is really growing, and we're happy to be a part of it.
Those were quite a few steps that you laid out. What are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to recycling plastics? Like I've read about, how different municipalities will have different regulations or processes. There's, things like mixed materials. A pad at the bottom of a clamshell package might not make it recyclable depending on the municipality and all these sorts of things. So what would you say are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to recycling plastics?
I would say, you hit the nail on the head with the municipal recycling systems being different across Ontario. It'd be really nice if we could move towards the harmonized system that I know our government is working towards, we're very happy with that. At that point, we can start educating the consumer on what should go in and in what form it should go in. So for us, we want the cap on the bottle. And then it allows that cap to be recycled. So just simple things like that with the harmonized system would be so much easier. And I think the consumer would appreciate that as well. Mm-hmm. From a contamination standpoint, the Blue Box does have contamination in it. We all know that. Things like PLA can be a contaminant, bio-based plastics, compostables that are not visually different from PET, multi-layer, multi-material. So again, the PET clamshell with that pad in the bottom can be a problem. Also PETG, so PET that has been altered in some form. But what we find at Ice River is that we just work to kind of work around those issues. We want to see that material clean up, definitely. PET is highly recyclable, but the contamination is a problem. But we'll always work towards better. And I think being able to work with the CPMA and get that information out is really important. Yeah,
of course. That kind of leads into my next question a little bit. From your experience at Ice River, what are some of the biggest takeaways that you can pass on to the produce industry?
So we've learned a lot over the last 10 years.
Yeah, of course.
But there are some good learnings for sure. So I think starting with reducing your packaging and reducing the items that really just don't fit in the Blue Box program at all can be a good place to start. Using materials that have that circular economy attached to them, that they add value, and that keeping that end of life in mind when you're designing packaging. Mm-hmm. That's always key. For us, we started by reducing our packaging first. So when we first got into the industry, we had water bottles going into a box. And then we moved to a tray with film. Then we moved to film only. And then we lightweighted that film. So just moving along, again, taking a step in the right direction each time. We lightweighted our bottle from 20 grams down to 8.5. We lightweighted our cap. Moving towards post-consumer content is always really a benefit because of the carbon footprint reduction and the, less reliance on virgin product. And then the other major piece we talk about is the function over aesthetic. So does the packaging function as it needs to? Does it accomplish its job? Does it necessarily have to look perfect to do it? And can we teach consumers that it might be better to not have so much of an aesthetic focus and move towards just function?
Yeah, we kind of talked a little bit earlier on in the show. Consumers are reasonable and would certainly be able to, I guess, get on board in terms of, maybe not so much buying based on the aesthetic, but based on knowing that, okay, this is less plastic or this is a better plastic or whatever it is.
And I think simplifying it, I mean, when you look at the shelf, you can see where there is overpackaging. And I think even our kids are starting to recognize overpackaging. So it's definitely, consumers are becoming very well educated on this.
Are there any specific challenges that, again, from your experience, that you would maybe foresee for the produce industry?
I think there's a really obvious one, and that is the shelf life versus packaging balance. Mm-hmm. So I totally understand that's not something that we really have to worry about with water. In a PET package, our water has a 2-year life, so minimum. So that's a huge benefit for us. But I think definitely that's going to be an issue for you guys. And finding that balance, I think the key is to find the balance and then be able to defend it factually, science-based. And then just to always work towards better, driving that industrial change. So don't just accept what is able to happen now, but really look for what can we do in the future. And sometimes those wild ideas that people come out with can end up being amazing solutions.
Yeah, certainly being open, being innovative, being proactive. And on the point of food waste, like you said, it's a balance. We talked a little bit earlier as well about the benefits of plastic packaging, and when we talk about shelf life, and when we talk about food safety and protecting the commodity from damage or anything like this. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think I heard somebody recently say that the world needs plastic. It was developed for good reasons and for for your example, food safety and shelf life and transportation reductions in weight, but it doesn't need plastic waste. So that's kind of the route that Ice River's going on. Yeah,
absolutely. And it certainly sounds like you're taking a collaborative approach, working with government and working with the Blue Box program. It's business and government side by side in some ways.
Right. I think we all have a part to play in it, consumer, producer, government, and if we all work together, which is interesting to me because sustainability kind of draws everybody together to work at the same level together. I think we can find great solutions.
Absolutely. Are there any other best practices, that you'd recommend?
I think the low-hanging fruit piece, go after the stuff that you can change right away, make those changes. Again, back to having that open discussion in your companies and, opening it up, bottom up, everybody having their opinion can be really beneficial. Understanding that you're not going to save the world in a day, so every little movement in the right direction is a good one. The last piece that I would add is that I am really excited to see that you guys are making decisions for the right reasons and moving towards just a better packaging line. Consumer perception and bottom line is often where we go to, but I think we also have to take the steps to educate ourselves and make sure that we're making the right choices for years in the future.
Mm-hmm. Good to be at the forefront of it, for sure.
You guys are doing great work.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Crystal. Have a great day.
Okay. You too.
A big thank you to David and Crystal for joining me on this episode. A couple of reminders. Check out cpma.ca/education to learn more about our e-learning courses, Produce Basics and Produce Essentials. Keep up to date with CPMA by following us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And click that subscribe button for Produce Talks on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies, continue to seek out new knowledge, and basically never stop growing.